Hi, everybody. This is Tim Kiver. We are introducing a new name to the podcast because we are on YouTube now. So we're going to go calling this LitRPG Guild Author Interviews. And so today we are interviewing Sean Oswald, a good friend of mine and the author of the Life in Exile series. Welcome, Sean. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Tim. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm well. It's a good day. I'm grateful for Saturdays where I can do some nerd math in my lit RPG stuff, and I've lost at Pokemon and another game with my son, and played some with my daughter. So it's been well rounded.
Yes, I've been hunted by a lion. My 5-year-old is fixated on Lion King. So she was sneaking up on me today, and I asked her if she was sneaking up. She said no, she was hunting me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was.
You are. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, yeah, what that is great. I love it. It's those are the moments we don't get back.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's certainly been on my mind of late. It is a blessing to have kids in the house, even though there are times where I would like to be writing more often. So we do have to just embrace that and be grateful. One of the, I guess, brand markers for your series and who you are as an author is that you have a large family, and your Life in Exile series is. How would you describe it about Swiss Family Robinson?
Uh, my favorite review was called it Swiss Family Robinson in Skyrim,
Okay.
which obviously if you're a gamer, you know what Skyrim is. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So being an author with a large family, you thought, what, I want to just see how much I can put into what it would be like to be a family in lit RPG. Had you seen that before, or what was your motivation that led to that?
okay, so brass tacks. It started with the idea of escapism, fantasy novels, and then when I found LitRPG in 2018, has been my escapism from the daily grind. Um, there's a there's a chapter quote in uh, the First Watcher's book that says essentially that nothing is more of a grind than the tyranny of the mundane, and that's going to work 9 to 5, 8 to 5, 7 to 5, 7 to 7, whatever it is. Okay, 5, 6, whatever days a week, coming home, cooking, cleaning, spending time with the kids, helping with homework. None of those things are bad in and of themselves, but they're all mundane and they all grind down on you. And I sought escapism in my books that I read. And I pondered, what would it be like to be sucked into one of those worlds? And what hit me was that I would miss my family. And so that raised the question, what would it be like to be there with your family? And that brings on a whole nother set of issues that the single protagonist doesn't have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. And so for our listeners who haven't read the Life in Exile series, we just released, like the Lit RPG Guild Masters, who Sean is one, but it's through Athon Books, just released Watcher's Repose. So that's book 4. So I am sensitive to not wanting to spoil things for folks that are listening. So we're going to dance around that and kind of look at the series from a high view, so that if folks haven't checked it out, that they should. I've already posted online that it's my favorite lit RPG series of 2020. So that's a high recommendation from me to check it out.
Yeah, I'm always flattered by that. So
The way that you wrote the book, there are some elements that are similar to your real life. It's not entirely point for point. But what are, so wanting to bring the family in and make it an escape with family. What were some of the areas in which it's similar for your main character and the family members that you did choose to include?
So, first off, my wife sometimes says, "Why did you include that conversation? We've had that conversation. Why did you include that in the book? People are going to think we fight." And I said, you are not Emily. I am not Dave. But yes, there are issues or elements that cross over. So, because you write what you know, at least in part. And when I write a character that I don't know, then I'm winging it. I know what Dave's life was, though. So what was common there? I mean, I just talked to you about the idea that I would feel drowned sometimes in the mundane aspects of my life. Well, that's who the main character is. He's the lawyer. He's got a good job. He's providing for his family. He sees that as his primary responsibility, and he's proud of the obligations that he meets, but he sees it somewhat as a duty rather than a joy. Again, my favorite fantasy series of all time is Wheel of Time, and the quote in there is that duty is as heavy as a mountain, death as light as a feather. The idea that it's the responsibilities in our life that can weigh us down sometimes, and that was kind of where Dave was stuck. His wife didn't understand his life. His wife didn't understand his her focus was entirely different. He was growing farther apart from his kids. And this shared experience, this trauma that they all endure together, brings them together in a way that they never would have been able to otherwise. 6 years ago, we had our own trauma with the death of a child. And she was an adult, but it doesn't matter whether they're 3 or 23, they're still your child. So, that was a trauma that can I don't know, shear many families apart, or in this case, it helped to bring us together in some other ways. So, it was I think the idea that there's that shared trauma, and certainly being teleported to another world and having to fight for your existence is a shared trauma. The family members, I have 8 daughters. So the teenage daughter Mira is a hodgepodge compilation of some of the worst traits that I've ever seen in my teenage daughters. Honestly, none of my kids have been Mira. But if you combined this from that child and that from that child, then you get Mira. Jackson is a little simpler for me. I have one son, so 8 girls and 1 boy. And so Jackson is probably a little bit more like that son. He's just a little older than my son, but my son is fixated on baseball and really loves playing it, and so does Jackson. And then we have our surprise baby, the one that we were done having kids, and then yet we still had another one, and she's 5. And I didn't want a child that young in the story, so I made Sarah be 8 when it started, which was already young enough. But there is a difference between 5 and 8. If you're a parent, you know what I mean, or if you're a parent with kids in that age range, you know what I mean. 5 is still very dependent. Thinks that they can do stuff that they can't do. 8 is to the point where, while they still obviously need you every day, they can pour their own bowl of cereal and things like that. So,
yeah, I've really enjoyed the series. I'm in book 3, and as I mentioned with Tay, we're not going to spoil things, so it'll be high view. But
I'm not going to give anything away, Tim. I promise.
Yes, well, yeah. I don't care about anybody else. For me, don't ruin book 3. So with the 3 children in the series, I've enjoyed. I feel like the the youngest girl still has her own story in a way that I enjoyed the weaknesses that she shows. So we're able to get into her mind through her emotions and how she would experience this new realm. And then with and that's total no spoilers because there's a lot of cool things that happens to her. The girl and how, or the teenage daughter and how she hides things, like she's
Mhm.
not entirely honest, and what that can lead to. It very much felt authentic to a teenage girl, and then the young man who wants to grow stronger and yet has those limitations because of his age.
Mhm.
It's all great stuff. Um, let's see. Are you able to see the questions, Sean? Um,
I'm sorry.
uh,
I just clicked over to where I can see it now.
okay.
Apologize. Um,
So go ahead and read the question and then answer so folks can hear that too.
okay, so how much did I have written in advance when the first Watchers book came out? So Watchers 2 was essentially written. It was still going through some editing, but it was essentially written when Watchers 1 came out. And I honestly, I feel almost sometimes apologetic because book 1 and 2 have some rookie author mistakes that I wish that I hadn't made. And I would probably write them slightly differently now. The story would remain exactly the same. So I'm not talking about story components. I'm talking about technical delivery. And then, but yeah, so when I first came out, the first 2 books were essentially written. And then there was a question, how long have I been writing? And so, yeah, May 19th, 2019, I asked my wife, I said, hey, would you mind if I spent $200? It's only $200. I'm going to get a cheap one on a Chromebook, and I'd like to try writing a book. Now, she, of course, said to me, why are you asking me that? And I said, well, because it's $200. I don't want to spend family money on a frivolous hobby because I've wanted to write a book since I was 17. I said I was going to write a book when I was 17. I haven't. And so Amazon, with their quick turnaround, I had it on the 21st. And so I've been writing officially since May 21st, 2019. And Watchers was actually written and completed by right about Labor Day in 2019, because that's when I first submitted it to the publisher.
So what's it like to go from, I mean, you've been a real success, Sean, and it's your first book. So
Yeah.
what do you think has helped you to get to that point? I mean, most folks, maybe present company included, have been writing for, decades and don't see that success. So what do you think? Because when I know you a little bit, and I know that your history has contributed to that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think would be some of the main things that allowed you to be that successful?
Okay, so not to offend anyone, but this is my personal view. I believe that it's a blessing from God. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that aside, I believe I've been lucky. It hit the right note. It resonated with people in the right way. I mean, my background is that I've done a little of this and a little of that. I've been a missionary in India. I've taught martial arts for a living. I've served in the Marine Corps. I'm a lawyer right now. I mean, I've worked in a medical transcription company. I've managed restaurants. I've done whatever had to be done to pay the bills over the years, and I have not followed a straight path. So I have. I mean, I'm 47 now. I have a fair amount of life under my belt at this point, and so I guess I draw on that.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, to be fair, there is just a lot of luck that goes into does a book hit the right way? Does it land at the right time? does it get the initial eyes on it? And I really think that the publisher Atheon helped me out a lot with getting that in the right way, making sure it had the right cover, making sure all of those components came out in the beginning. And so I really place that. I place a lot of credit for getting me started with them too. So,
and the Life in Exile series. There was a question from Tay about the idea of being a plotter or a pantser. What's your scope for this series?
So the series is outlined at 12 books. When I say outlined, I mean I have a bullet point outline of what's going to happen, chapters and major events. And I know where it's going to end, and I know where the big battles are, where the baddies are revealed and things like that. Books 1 through 4 covered one story arc. Books 5 and 6 are going to cover a longer span of time, and it's to allow the kids to grow up, and it's going to focus more on the 3 kids. Then I guess in my outline, story arc number 1 is country level. Story arc 2 is continent level, and that's books 7 through 9. And then story arc 3 is a return to the old world, and that's the books 10 through 12. So yeah, it's there. And I will say this, because I like to do this, because then it makes people look. There is so much foreshadowing in the chapter quotes, even in book 1. And you don't see those if you're reading or if you're listening to it. So, and I don't want to discourage anybody from listening if that's the way that you enjoy the book. But if you see it, if you read it, you'll get these chapter quotes at the beginning of each chapter, and a lot of them give history and lore that gives big hints about things in the future. That I'm sitting here saying, how are you not seeing this? And probably other people are like, what are you talking about? But it'll become clear later on, and people will be like, oh, I remember when, this was hinted at. So
I'm trying to think, did they add the quotes to the audiobooks after book 1?
I don't know. Did they? If they're in there, I don't know. I get samples of the audiobook to listen to.
Okay.
But
yeah, I think they do. But anyway, the audiobook is Peter Burkrot. And let's see, I've queued up a section from chapter 4 that I thought was pretty funny. So I'm going to play this, and maybe BF will edit it if it's not perfect.
Chapter 11. The troops of other states have their reputation.
Well, that was right away not perfect.
Chapter 4.
I'm in chapter 11 by now.
The struggles between the races were only an workaholic with Peter Pan syndrome.
I apologize, guys. I got to take off the timer at 1.5 speed too. I forgot about that.
Never had really liked that guy.
Oh, that's not where I want it. Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
I'm gonna.
While you're doing that, I'll answer Tay's other question.
Yeah, sure.
So you asked the mandatory question about what advice do I have? Really, consistency, and then remember that, and by consistency I mean write every day or 5 days a week or whatever it is that you plan. Just do something. It doesn't have to be a lot of words. Just have consistency to get it out there. And in terms of trying to publish a book, I think write it first, and then we'll talk about that afterwards.
All right. So this is referring to the counselor that your main character visits.
Yes.
He kept telling himself that this is where heroes are made. Not in just slaying the monster, but in helping to pick up the pieces back home. At least that was what his and Emily's marriage counselor back home had asserted, after pegging Dave as what he called a workaholic with Peter Pan syndrome. Dave never had really liked that guy. Shaking his head.
So I fumbled through playing that for you guys, but I hope you enjoyed it because I thought that was a funny quote, and I see maybe a little bit of you in that that quote, Mr.
Yeah.
Peter Pan syndrome. So introduce us a little bit to the setting of the story. Like it's an isekai.
Okay.
How does our family get into the world, and then what is the challenge that they face when they get there?
Okay, so first off, this world was originally written as a homebrew pen and paper Dungeons and Dragons Pathfinder, that kind of game. So that was the original creation for the background of the world. The world that they're in, they're on the continent of Talos. They end up in a wooded area that it's revealed pretty early on in book one that they're in an area that was kind of originally elven territory, but the humans are starting to lay claim to, so there's going to be some future conflicts that are sort of hinted at there. And Eloria is not a respawn world. This isn't where you get to go and if you die, you die, and get to bounce right back with a little XP penalty. No, Eloria is a real life world where if you die, you're dead, and that's the end of it. But it's also magical in the sense that people have hit points and mana points, and they have, yes, if your head's cut off, you're dead, no matter how many hit points you have. But you can also heal from injuries that you wouldn't have otherwise healed from because it works differently there, which is one of the things I love is presenting a little bit of Emily's. Emily is a nurse on Earth, presenting a little bit of her frustration because medicine is viewed differently there than it would be on Earth. So, it's there is a little bit of struggle in the beginning. So there's some real they're kind of, I don't know, they're winning, but they're losing at the same time. They're suffering to make any strides forward. And it's not like they walk in and they're immediately king of the world. They've got to struggle through that. And I think that's important in any good lit RPG story, is that you don't give the characters so much that it's not so easy in the beginning. But lit RPG is also a story about progression and growth and development, and so you can't stay there forever either. So, but the world is very much one of conflict. I mean, that's the entire expression. Eloria is conflict. So,
and what is your main character's class? What class does he choose?
Well, that's a whole interesting thing, because unlike many books, you don't start out with a class. So you have to earn a class. You have to meet the prerequisites for it. And so in book, I mean, I don't know how much you want me to say in that regard, because Dave is choosing skills, and he's practicing skills, and he's spending his character points, but he doesn't have a class in the beginning. And in fact, it's kind of a bone of contention that his wife and daughter get a class, and he doesn't, and he has a little bit of jealousy going on there. So probably more than a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't want to spoil, because one of the things I enjoyed most, I think it's in book 2, is where there's a rare class that's offered, and he's struggling over should he choose it or not, because that's not really what he wanted. I enjoyed that. So your stuff is a little bit on the crunchy side.
Yep.
What would you say is your process for the game mechanics?
Well, it involves dice, and it involves random number generators, and actually trying to determine things. There's there's a scene in book 2 where I had outlined it in my head one way, and it was based on a success. I assumed they were going to succeed at something. And as I was writing, I'm kind of generating the random numbers to see what actually happens. And they fail at something that I thought they were going to succeed at. And the chapter, in my opinion, turned out better because they failed at something, if that makes sense. So there's some randomness, but the reader isn't going to know that exactly. I mean, that's my process behind the scenes. And it's, to me, it makes it feel more authentic if there's the possibility for them to fail at something too. So.
Yeah, well, I've enjoyed the way you write, Sean, and the way that the stats are written. It flows well as an audiobook. I think there's sometimes opinions about too much information that would be better scanned on a page, and then how does it transfer into an audiobook? Right. I feel like there's a flow in feeling like someone's telling you a fireside story. It's good. It's good in depth, and it listens well. How much? So there is city building. How much, or what side of the spectrum would you describe this as a city building type series?
Okay, so there's some extreme detail for some of it, but I wouldn't consider that to be the primary focus, at least not where you're at. There's definitely, I think I can say this without it being spoiled. There's more of that in book 4. So, but there's population figures, and how many hunters there are and how many this. So there's a detail there, and the thought process of how many units of this can we produce, and what can we do with that, and they're not in a position in the beginning where they get to line up their building materials and click their fingers and spin their energy, and the building appears. Okay, they actually have to physically build the building, so it doesn't really have a lot of that same game element, if that makes sense. It's more actually the way they would have to do it if this was just a straight up fantasy world instead of LitRPG maybe. And I don't have anything wrong with that. In fact, I'm reading right now a very famous LitRPG series, reading book 6 of it, and lamenting that it's the last book in the series. And in my opinion, it's one of the best city builders, and I really love the city building in it. I don't think Watchers is as much a city builder like that, but there is definitely some of it. Especially, start to get it in book 2, you get a little more in book 3, and you'll get definitely a big jump up in that in book 4. So.
So Tay's asking a few questions. If we run out of time, maybe you can follow up after. But one of the things that I've noticed about you, Sean, is that you write a lot and you're producing quickly. You've mentioned before one of your goals as an author is not to make readers wait for a long time. So is it every 3 months that you've published? Is that your goal?
Right. So Watchers has come out every 3 months. And it is my goal to never make a reader wait more than 3 months between installments in a series. That said, there's a disclaimer at the end of book 4 that says there's going to be a longer wait before the next series because I have something else coming out this year. So I have another series that is called Change and is coming out this year, and I'm excited about it. It's going to be another fun project. You'll probably relate to this, Tim. You get all these stories in your head, and sometimes you're telling one, but you're also thinking about the other one that you want to tell too. And it's like your children. You can't say that one's your favorite or not, but you want to spend some time on both of them. So, and to be fair, I have there's probably a reason why LitRPG resonates with me, because I'm probably my wife and I joke that I'm somewhere on the spectrum because I have my own little neuroses about numbers and things in organization. But I have a chart that plots out the next 7 years worth of books. So, we'll see.
I've had a sneak peek of that, maybe even just for the next year, and it's impressive. So it's good news for readers and fans like me. What do you think would be something that stands out as advice for new authors based on what you've experienced this past year with publishing?
Nobody wants to hear this when they're an author, but in my opinion, just my opinion, your cover is more important than your story concept to get people to read your book in the first place. Your story concept is more important than the quality of your writing to get people to read your book in the first place. The quality of your writing is more important than the editing to get somebody to read your book in the first place. But then start reversing those things a little bit for maintaining longevity. Quality writing maintains people coming back for book 2 and 3 and 4. A novel concept or the family angle of Watchers was something different that people hadn't seen. Something that hooks people in the story concept that excites people. So you cannot just say I've written this great story and think it's going to automatically sell. You have to have the cover. You have to have the blurb that hooks people in. So I guess people like to think that it stands alone on whatever they've written, but there's more to it than that. And then again, there is a luck component to this. So,
Well, certainly Athon Books and Steve Bollier do an incredible job on covers. So your stuff is among the top in the genre. So congrats to Steve and Athon on that, and the artists that they've used with your series. So the other side of the spectrum, what for maybe more seasoned authors, what advice would you give to them based on how you're going to approach 2021? What do you feel like is something that you're going to try and learn from and do better going forward?
What I've already learned moving forward is some technical aspects of writing. But in general, in broad strokes, what I am just continuing to put out material. The biggest thing that I can say is you just keep writing, because even if one series doesn't hit the way that you want, it doesn't mean the next one won't. So, and that's, I guess I'm in groups where I talk to seasoned authors, the people who have been doing this for a living for half a dozen years or more. Because I have a day job. This is just something I do in my extra time right now. I don't consider myself to be any kind of expert on it. But the thing that I keep hearing from them is keep writing, keep swinging, because the baseball euphemism is that not every single swing is going to be a home run, but you can't ever hit a home run if you don't keep swinging. So.
How have you grown in your writing discipline? How has that changed over the past year?
So I've had one upward thing. So I've had two upward things and one downward thing. One downward thing is I've become more distractible by social media interaction because I try to be very accessible. If I get a message from a reader, I try to respond to that almost immediately. So I do get a little more distracted like that, but I've learned to be more productive, and that's just a matter of practice. I mean, when I first started, my goal was to get 1,500 words a day in written, and now my goal is to get 5,000 words a day in. And it's not that I'm spending that much more time; it's just that I'm better at getting the words out faster. And some of that is developing a little bit of a process for outlining. So I've got that general outline, but when I'm in the shower in the morning, I'm outlining what I'm going to write that day. I'm literally going through the conversations that are going to appear in the dialogue, or the movements that are going to appear in the fight sequence, so that when I do sit down to write, it comes out faster. And then the final thing is that I have had to learn that some things that I liked didn't necessarily translate very well over to LitRPG. So I've learned to do, at least I hope I've learned to do things like point of view changes better than I did in the beginning, if that makes sense.
So what do you think LitRPG thinks about POV changes that you have now tried to make better for going forward?
All right, well, first off, I've really upped the signposting on the, especially in book 3, I've started upping the signposting, making more clear the point of view changes. Okay. I've started moving to trying to have one point of view per chapter versus splitting a chapter. And then in book 4, this isn't a spoiler, but in book 4, you're going to get huge chunks of one perspective. I think the first 20,000 words are all from one character's perspective, for example, versus getting a 4,000 word chapter and then going to somebody else's perspective, and so on and so forth. And that, so far, the feedback I'm getting is that that's very well received. So they don't. At first, I thought they minded having different points of view in the book, but I don't think that was what it was. I think it was that I transitioned them a little too quickly. So,
yeah, well, it's an epic story, so that's a hard balance sometimes.
It is because I like I said, Wheel of Time was my favorite series, and obviously that's got a bajillion points of view, and I think my vision exceeded my talent at first, but this is like anything, practice makes perfect. So I keep plodding away and hoping to learn, and I listen to people. There are people that I when they talk, I really listen because I know that they know what they're talking about. I mean, Teo asked if I read. See, I said Teo because Teo is an author in our genre that when he says something, I listen because I know that he knows what he's talking about. But Tay asked a question if I read any books to learn to write. A little bit. This could sound so bad, but I'm not really worried about books from people who aren't writing in or pretty close in my genre about how to write. I'm really worried more about the input I would gain from the actual authors who are being successful in my genre. But then again, I started this out to be a hobby, and maybe someday I'll get to do this full time, but I started out to do this as a hobby, and so I just wanted to write the stories I wanted to write, and I wanted to listen to the people who I respected as authors, not somebody who wrote a book and said, this is the technical way to do it. Because I fail on all of those fronts. I just want to tell a story. So.
Well, I don't know so much about failing on all those fronts, but I'm impressed with even your technical writing ability. So just keep it up, Sean. You're doing well.
Yeah. Well, so let me shout out to another new author, TJ Reynolds. So I know you know TJ. So I look at TJ's technical expertise, and I'm just like, wow, I wish I could write as smoothly as he does. He's just exceptionally talented at that. I think we both are good storytellers, so I don't feel bad in that comparison. But when I look at his technical skills, then I realize he taught English as a professor, so he maybe had some skills in that regard. And I realized that my experience in legal writing doesn't really qualify me to write fantasy novels because they're very different kinds of writing. But the point was that there are people out there who I have a lot to learn from, and I want to learn from those people.
I've got Guild Core by TJ at my bedside, and I feel bad because I'm, would love to make more progress, but it's like every sentence I'm just like, wow, that's how I wish I could write.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, props to TJ. Well, thanks for taking time today, Sean. Where can people find you online?
So I obviously live on Facebook a lot, so I'm in all the LitRPG groups. I have a Patreon, but I don't really plug that much. And I'm on Discord for the relevant groups there too. The Guildmasters group and the LitRPG forums group. So, and I am, as I said, I'm exceptionally responsive if anybody messages me with questions or wants to talk about things. I'm very willing to do that. So, probably to my own detriment sometimes.
Yes. Well, we're glad to have you in the LitRPG Guild, and we appreciate your leadership and friendship there. So,
thanks, Tim.
Congrats on all your success with the Life in Exile series. And so, Watcher's Test is book 1.
Yep.
Correct. I always get it switched. Okay, so Watcher's Test is book 1, so everybody go check that out. And Watcher's Repose is the most recent release. Thanks again, Sean. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Yep. Bye.